Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about today is the difference in weight, the pros and cons of each. There seems to be a lot of discussion about a heavyweight meta. I want to kind of get rid of that thought process. Every weight is viable. You just have to think about strategy differently, right? I think that was the meta before because it's just easier to dominate if you have heavyweight because the strategy required is easier. But if you have a lightweight, you can actually dominate the heavyweight as well, but it's just a little more difficult, right? It takes a little more skill, but I'm confident you guys can get there. So I'm just going to be talking about that in this session. First, I'm going to be kind of showing you guys in the playground, and then I'm going to actually draw some stuff just so you guys can get a sense of like what's actually happening. Hopefully that'll solidify a lot of this stuff and you guys can come up with some good strategies. Um, I'm also not going to be doing too much math this time, so you're welcome. Although if you like it, I'll do more math the next time, but this is more kind of the core game instead of machine learning stuff. So um, what I'll do is I'll start up the playground. Um, you'll notice that I added something in the top right corner over here. Um, this is just for like the devs, but we often use this when trying to refine mechanics. Um, so here I just added a few toggles that I can use. So for example, I can change my elemental gauge over here so I can like max it out, or like this is just for me to do like repeated like elements very easily. I can change my guy's weight. This is going to come very useful in this session. I can change the opponent's weight. I can also adjust the opponent's percentage, which is also going to come useful because I can show you guys different things. So the first thing I'll kind of walk through is just worry about my own weight. I won't worry about the relative weights for now. Um, but if I just worry about my own weight, um, 80 is the mean, 65 is the lowest, and you see that you go the fastest, and then 95 is the heaviest, and you see it's quite slow, right? And the weight affects a lot of things. One of them is obviously sort of like the running speed. Another one is also how high you can jump, right? So you see how high I can jump over here. It kind of reaches the bottom of this platform if I do a double jump. If I go to the lightest weight, now I can jump way higher. Now, the first implication of this is obviously that it's easier to recover when you're lighter. And I think someone actually posted something like that on Discord. I was reading it like literally 5 minutes ago, where they're like, my guy's too heavy, he can't recover. So for those who kind of really want a heavy fighter, this is one of the downfalls, right? If you have a very, very heavy fighter, it's hard to recover. And I'll show you an example. So right now I'm the lightest fighter, I'm 65. If I go to like down here, I can still very easily recover, right? And I'm literally almost at the bottom of the screen. Now let me go to a 95 weight. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. Bottom of the screen, done. There's no way you can recover from that point if you have a 95 weight. You basically need to start recovering like there, and you barely make it. Versus like if you have like a 95 weight and you start recovering the same spot, it's like you clear the you clear the platform like super easy. Like it's not even funny. So that's the first thing I want to say is that lighter weight has better mobility in general, whether that's on the ground or just aerial mobility. Like you're able to move very freely around. Um, I think most people kind of understand this this concept though. I see the time's about to run out. We'll just reset it. I think most people kind of understand this concept, but I just kind of want to reiterate it. Um, the next thing, which is a bit kind of like less intuitive, I think, I'll just play again, um, is that the lighter weight you are, um, the less you knock back the opponent. Okay, and That's a good and bad thing, and I'll explain why. So what I'll do is I'll put my weight at the lightest. I'll put my opponent's weight at the heaviest. Actually, let's just keep it at 80 for now. Just want to show you guys something. And then I have this toggle here, increment percentage. You see, like if I every time I hit my opponent, it obviously takes damage off my opponent. But when debugging and just like analyzing things, it's often helpful just to hold it fixed. So now, for example, when I hit the opponent, it doesn't do anything to the health. Okay. Um, I'll I'll keep my opponent's health to 0. And so now you see that. So I'm very light. My opponent, I'll put my opponent all the way. My opponent's very heavy, right? And the headbutt is the most powerful attack. So let's power that out. You see that the opponent doesn't really fly far, right? Versus if the weights were switched, I'm the heaviest and my opponent's the lightest. Actually, you can't really see it at weight 0. I'll bump it up to like weight like 50, for example, right? So now there's a huge discrepancy. You see kind of how far the opponent went. It almost went off screen, right? But let's switch up the roles over here. Now I'm the lightest weight and my opponent's the heaviest. Barely moved. It moved like halfway, right? The knockback was like about half. So that has two implications. The first implication is that if you are heavier than your opponent, it is easier to knock them out in one hit. Okay? Which is why a lot of people like the heavy fighters because they can just do these one hit or two hit combos and then they can send their opponents flying. The downfall is that it's much harder to actually combo because of the fact that you hit them so far and you move so slowly, right? It becomes very, very hard to for example, do like a multiple hit combo because by the time you get to them, they're already recovering and could be attacking you. So I'll show you an example of this. Um, so I'll set my opponent's percentage to 65. I was testing this out earlier. I think this is the correct weight, but let's assume I'm at weight 65 over here. My opponent's at weight 80, right? So I'm 15 pounds lighter than them. Um, and if I throw my opponent, I can easily combo into the flying kick, right? Like that. And it's what's known as a true combo. So a true combo is something in which it doesn't rely on like your opponent doing something for you to hit the combo. It'll happen no matter what if you hit this certain um, if you hit basically this certain like inputs on time because the opponent is still going to be in hit stun so they can't do anything and you can just follow up perfectly versus um, let's just say I'm really heavy, right? Let's say I'm really heavy. Instead, see, it's even hard to like jump when you're this heavy. Um, I don't know if you guys saw what happened there. So I tried doing the exact same thing. I timed it the exact same way, but my opponent actually hit me instead of me hitting the opponent. And there's two reasons for that. The first is that I actually hit the opponent farther away because of the fact that I was heavier and stronger. So I hit them farther away. The second thing is I moved slower, so I wasn't able to get to them as fast. Okay, and I'm gonna actually draw this out for you so you guys know exactly what's going on over here. So give me one sec to set this up. Alrighty, so let's go into draw over here. Um, I'll denote like our fighter with like red over here, and we can denote the opponent in blue over here. So let's say we'll use this for like the arrows. So let's say we go ahead and we hit our opponent, right? Or in this case, we threw our opponent, right? Um, so depending on kind of a lot of things like, well, mainly depending on our weight, but also like the damage they incurred and stuff like that, they will get knocked back to a certain point. Okay, let's just say we're keeping the damage fixed and all we're adjusting is the weight. So this is one weight, This can be another weight. This can be another weight, right? So they get knocked back to these various different spots over here. Okay. Um, so these arrows is basically kind of like how long they're in hit stun and then where they can recover. Okay. Once they get to the end of this, they can start doing stuff. So let's say now our fighter is able to travel up until about like here. Okay. Now, if they're able to travel until up about, actually, let's make it like right up until here. So they're able to travel until here. What does that mean? It means that this area over here is um, is good for them to be able to combo into easily, right? So because the opponent is not going to be able to do anything until this point, right? For these knockbacks. So now, and we're able to travel all the way to here. So we're able to combo them easily, right? But what happens in the case that we were super strong, right? And we hit them all the way over here. So once we're strong, we're able to hit them all the way over here. But because we're strong, it means we're heavy. We're not able to travel as far. So we're probably only able to travel to around here before the person gets out of hit stun, right? And what that means is in this heavy scenario, right, we are actually in trouble over here because we're moving forward with an attack, but the opponent gets out over here and they're able to come forward and attack us, right? So that's exactly what we saw. When I was weaker or lighter, I was able to throw them. They went less far, and because I moved faster, I was able to get there before they got out of hit stun and hit them again with a combo. But you saw in the heavy scenario, I threw them farther, right? I travel less quick, so they were able to get out of hit stun and attack me before I was able to get to them. So this is one super important concept in platform fighters is that yes, heavier fighters are able to hit them back further, but there's this it makes comboing really really difficult, right? So there is a downside to it. Um, Now, what that means is that you have to be more skilled to make the lighter fighter work because, of course, in order to pull off like combos, especially mid-air combos, it's harder than just doing like a one hit. But if you're able to truly master this, right, then I think the doors really open up, and I think the meta will change drastically once people really like are able to refine their AIs to do this. And for those in exclusive access, you might have saw some of my AI's combos where I did like 5 combos in a row. That fighter was actually the lightest weight possible, and that's why I was able to string together like 5 different combos because the knockback wasn't too large. So I was able to hit them basically all the way to the edge of the map. Um, so I'm going to pause for a second to see if anybody has any questions on this. I am going to elaborate on it in a sec, but I just wanted to give some people a bit of time.
No questions right off the bat.
Okay.
There was just a comment that the mouse people couldn't see the mouse because you were hovering it,
I see.
and it still doesn't show up on the whiteboard yet.
Okay.
But I think it's okay. I think this one more straightforward conceptually. So
Okay.
I hope people understand. Yeah.
Okay, I mean, one thing to note is in my recording, the mouse does appear there, so um, should should be fine for like YouTube, for example. Um, that's if we use my recording. If not, then sorry guys. All right, I'm just gonna expand on this point a little bit over here. So let's say this is our map. This is our stage over here. Um, Again, I will draw our little guy right here, and then the opponent right here. So what we constantly see is people edge guarding with a headbutt, right? Which is a great technique. Just try not to spam it too much. There is a downside to spamming. Each attack gets less and less powerful, um, and deals less damage. But let's just say, for example, they like perfectly timed a headbutt. Now, um, this is one of the reasons why people really love um, the heavy fighters is because let's say your opponent has high damage, you time a headbutt near the edge. What happens is they'll, oops, that's way too thick. Um, what happens is they will fly all the way out and then they'll die, right? Versus if you're a lighter fighter, right? What happens is you might hit them over here, right? And obviously they can still recover. And you did the exact same attack, but you're just super, super light, so you can't knock them out. But if you take the concept of what I just showed you, what you can do is you can follow up, hit them again, and then knock them out, right? So you should be able to get similar results. You just need a slightly different strategy, right? One of them relies a lot more on being grounded. You don't want to do too much aerial attacks if you're heavy because you might not be able to recover. But if you're light, you can recover from basically anywhere on the map. So you can get a lot more free with your aerial combos, right? And both scenarios, you can kill someone from the same spot, but you just need a different strategy, right? I really want to emphasize that because a lot of people think like they can't make a light fighter work. It's because they're approaching it from the perspective of trying to train a heavy fighter. And you need to completely reframe your thinking here, okay? Um, just building on this point, one thing I wanted to show you, as you saw in the playground, that the heavy fighter couldn't recover, it's because of the fact that their velocity gets affected once they're heavy, right? So, for example, let's say you're down here. Actually, let's do purple, because let's say you can be either the opponent, and red and blue make purple. Okay, so let's say you are the light fighter, right? If you're the light fighter, each of your jumps, whether it's each like up attack, gives you a lot of vertical distance, right? But when you are a heavy fighter, for example, each jump doesn't get you that far, right? And you might not be able to recover from this point, right? And if you tie these two together, they go hand in hand, like I mentioned before. Light fighters fight differently. They're able to recover from anywhere, so you need to get more comfortable with kind of like going near the edge. Now, one thing I want to stress is that um, it could be dangerous if you're a light fighter. So you need to make sure you are always on the inside of your opponent. Okay. Um, now, okay, now what do I mean by that? So, um, let's say this is you, and oops, I'll just use a black arrow. Let's say this is you, and then you somehow like move over here, right? And your opponent is able to be on the left side of you. So now, because your opponent's heavier, if they hit you, you're gonna go flying out, right? Because you're lighter. Um, so what you want to make sure is that if your opponent does that, then you do like a back air, for example, to hit them in, or if you don't connect with them, at least you'll be on the left side of them. But what you always want to do is you want to be on the inside of your opponent, right? Imagine this is the center, right? If your opponent's up here, you want to be down here. If your opponent is down here, you want to be up here, right? Same thing on the right hand side. If your opponent is here, you want to be to the left. And then if your opponent's all the way on the left side, you want to be to the right of your opponent, right? So you always want to kind of be closer to the center than your opponent. This is just general strategy. I think most people should try to aim to do this, but it's especially important if you're lighter than your opponent and you're fighting in the air because they can just really knock you out of bounds. Okay. Um, I hope this makes sense. I'm gonna pause for a second to see if anybody has any questions on this.
It does make sense. There is a question from Frozen Sense who's asking, are you able to show us this live, this concept where you like basically you're asking how do you train for a light fighter to do this aerial combo um and you know, yeah, basically how do you train for that? I think part of the question is probably like maybe it's like in the data collection side, how do you set up the situation where you're actually able to train for this mid-air combo?
Mm, mm. Um, so okay, so I do a few things. Um, let me just So, one thing I think I've done it in a previous session. Um, so let me just reset this girl. Okay. Okay. Cool. So, you can do two things. Also, for those who don't know, we added the ability to toggle weight, right? Which is really cool. And I'll actually show you an application of this soon, of like how we can use it. Um, But usually what I'll do if I want to train a lot of mid-air combos is I will fight against the well-rounded fighter. The reason for that is because I'm going to put myself in the scenario of being mid-air a lot, right? Because they're going to knock me back, and then I can start showing you what to do in these scenarios. Um, but before I get there, I usually start off on the dummy. And what I do is I specifically teach it to follow my opponent, right? I always wanted to know, like, if my opponent's on the right side, I do a right attack. If my opponent's above me, I do something like an up aerial, sort of like an up air or like an up special. If they're on the left, go to the left. If they're below me, do like a down air, right? I always make sure that they're kind of tracking the opponent so that when we're in the air, right? If my opponent's here, it's going to do the appropriate move. If my opponent's here, it's going to do the appropriate move. Same thing down here, right? So I make sure it's always able to basically track my opponent. Um, Now, the tricky thing is if you're tracking the opponent too closely, right? Once you get here and your opponent is basically down here, you can probably easily suicide. Um, and so what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to also focus on your positioning, right? And you can explicitly train your AI so that when it gets too far away, go back to the center, right? Regardless of whether your opponent is here or not. Um, Now this takes, I don't know if I'll be able to do it in one session. This usually takes a lot of kind of like a trial and error in terms of like small tuning here and there to really refine it. But that's the general process. And then after you set up your AI to be like pretty solid, using the dummy, then I like going into well-rounded. We can have a go at that for now. I'll just select this map over here. Alrighty. Okay, so like I mentioned, the first thing I like doing is just teaching it what to do in all different directions, right? So if I'm here, I like basically showing it what to do on the left-hand side. I'll do the same thing on the right-hand side. Okay, so basically now it knows that when it's to the left or to the right, to go towards the opponent. Similarly, you can do something. I'll just put my opponent up here so that when I'm below my opponent, right, I know to do sort of like some up aerial combos. I actually missed there, but if you remember from my previous lesson on interpolation, it will kind of learn um, to basically still hit the opponent within a certain range. So now it kind of knows what to do when my opponent is above it. I'll just do a few others for good measure, just through it. The reason I did that is because previously my opponent was on a platform, and so because I don't want my AI to just kind of pay attention to doing that when it's on a platform, I showed it what to do after I threw it. For good measure, I always like kind of like switching sides. Okay, and now what I'll do is I'll go above my opponent, and then I'll do a down smash, just to have diversity in direction. So now it kind of knows what to do when I'm to the side, above, and below my opponent. I'll also do it. Um, just want to give it a few different scenarios. So I'll stop training over here and I'll hop into here. And then I'm specifically just going to focus on angle to opponent and distance to opponent. Okay, bump up epochs. And then we'll start training just to get kind of like the core policy working. Okay, cool. So it seems to know what it's doing, right? So now when it's above the opponent, it's doing the down air. When it's the left, it's attacking to the right, right? When the opponent is above it, it's doing the up air and it's mixing in some special because we showed it both, right? And then if, for example, I do the up air, I can see that the probability of special increases a little bit because I showed it that. If I'm to the right of the opponent, it's attacking. This one looks like it's mostly going down. It might have been a platform thing, but you see that, yeah, it's a platform thing so that when it's in the air, it knows to go to the left. Slight tweaking that still needs to get done, but I can see that a solid core policy is being formed. So I'll just save it over here. Now, what we can do is we can see what happens when it's in the air. So right now, this one will lead to sort of like a punch. This one, the highest probability is down, right? So we need to certainly tune that. This one, there is a good probability of it doing a down air. And so this is kind of like the process I usually take, just inspect my AI, see what's going on. In this case, it kind of looks good. It will hold up. Up is the dominant probability here. There's various probabilities over here, but there's some probability of attack or special. So it kind of looks like it knows what it's doing. And then before actually getting into the next step, I like hopping into simulation over here. Um, we'll do the basic environment just to kind of see how the AI performs and see kind of where we need to tweak. So right now it's too dominant on down, but I also didn't teach it how to get back onto platform, so this might turn out bad. But it's able to kind of like, seems like it's able to attack the opponent pretty well. Yep, so it
Brandon,
doesn't.
one question coming in from Mandelbrot is you did all of that in one training session. Do you prefer to do all of that in one training session, all the directional settings, as opposed to different data collection sessions?
Yes, I do. I do. I'll explain why in a second, but here, okay, so I'll get back to that. But like, yeah, you see that my my girl over here, she kind of knows how to like follow the opponent. She's doing the appropriate actions at times, so I'm pretty happy with this. I'll kind of end simulation over here. Obviously, we need to train, get back onto platform, but that's not the topic of this video. Just wanted to show you guys how to follow it. The next one is actually training on like a well-trained opponent. Um, with that said, so going back to Mandelbrot's question, I prefer to train all of this stuff in one session. Um, the reason for that is because it uses the same, how do I explain this? It uses the same features, right? If they all share the same features, generally speaking, it's easier for the neural network to learn those things together, as opposed to you learning just like down air one time, and then you try training like an up air another time using the exact same features. Chances are it might use very similar connections in the neural network, and what would happen is it could lead to some overriding. Of course, Lambda does help with that, but it's not perfect, right? It's usually better if you have both of the kind of like instances present while you're optimizing at the same time, because then the loss function kind of makes a trade-off and it tries to find basically the right connections that will satisfy basically learning both of them at once. Um, with that said, the lambda should help a lot, but that's usually why I like doing it. It's just generally easier to train a model that way. Um, cool. I'll actually no, I'm not going to hop back into simulation. We'll now train against a well-rounded opponent over here. I'll use the same stage. And I'm just going to turn data collection on the whole time. I think I kind of walked you guys through this before. Um, so usually I like kind of let it hit me so that we can get into the air. Um, Okay, cool. Oh, it's not following me. I'll just force it into the air, and then you can kind of show it what to do there. Um, okay, now we're back into the air. This one doesn't like going into the air much. I guess I trained it too well. We had a few instances. It wasn't great. Let's kind of see what it learned. I know I certainly want it to focus on getting back onto platform. I want to focus on angle and distance to opponent. Um, I usually start, I just try like a few hyperparameters, see what kind of works, what doesn't work. One thing you'll note is that the training is going slower because I collected more data, right? Just be cognizant of this. Obviously, the larger your data set, the longer it'll take to train. So once it's done, but we do have an ability to end early if you don't like the direction of where things are going. I seem to like it. It looks pretty good to me. Um, yep, that looks good. It reduced the probability of going up a lot because I didn't do that much in this session. But if I jump, no, it doesn't increase the probability too much, so I probably won't save this. Um, it did increase the probability of recovering to platform though, so it might not be too bad of a thing to save. But I kind of want to see the combos over here, so it's certainly going forward with the combos, which is great. If I switch it up to the other side, yeah, so it looks like it will combo into the opponent nicely. So even though it reduced the probability of kind of like doing like an uppercut, I'll still save it anyway, kind of see how it performs. Hop back into training. Um, oh, one thing to note before I do that is the reason I know it'll hit combos in the air is because you can string together multiple aerial punches together. Versus you can't do that for some of the other attacks, like up special or up air. You only have one of those per aerial session until you kind of collide with the platform. The reason for that is because those obviously give you height and help recovery, and so we have to limit the amount of those. But something like an aerial punch doesn't help recovery at all. So you can string together a bunch of those in air. So I'll hop back into here, see how see how she performs now. I'm hoping for like a nice aerial situation over here. I was jumping a lot, so she kind of learned that. That was not good. We need to reduce the probability of shield. She should not be rolling off. But here you see, I don't know if you guys saw that, she just strung together a few combos over there in the mid-air. And that's because we focused a lot on tracking the opponent, right? So she knows where the opponent is, and she's able to follow the opponent and string together multiple hits. So there, that's exactly what I was talking about. Obviously, she doesn't know how to recover too well, but over there, she was able to string together multiple hits, which is exactly kind of what we wanted to teach it. Um, so yeah, so that's kind of like the basics on basically how to teach your AI to, and this is only after 2 sessions, right? Of course, the more sessions you put in, the more you can fine tune everything. Um, Actually, I like the roll there, just before she rolled to her death. Um, yeah, obviously you see that there's a lot we can still do to improve, but that's kind of the basics on how to kind of string together kind of multiple hits. Of course, what I would do next is I would hop back into the inspector over here, figure out where everything went wrong. Um, yeah, so over here, for example, it was it accidentally, not accidentally, there's a probability. So it pressed shield and went to the right. So what happens is it rolled down here. Um, and once it rolled down here, basically, it looks like it tried jumping and then at that point it just kind of like fell to its death because it didn't press up anymore. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna pause for a second here to see if anybody has any questions. And of course, the next step is just I know this is the weakness. I specifically train this, get better at it, and I oscillate usually between the dummy and the well-rounded.
So maybe just to recap, the so the question was like, how do you get to a point where you're able to train um, like these aerial combos? And the first step was your AI needs to learn the basics of how to track your opponent,
Yes,
right?
that is the most important thing. It has to learn how to track the opponent.
Right. So that was the first round of data collection that Brandon did, which is like, okay, if your opponent is up, you want to do uppercuts. If it's to your left, if it's to your right, if it's below you, like that is the basics of your AI learning how to track your opponent. Without knowing that, it probably won't be able to do these aerial combos anyway. So that,
Exactly. Because it needs to know if your opponent's to the right of you, go to the right and attack, and if they're to the left of you, go to the left. Um, but
yeah,
as you just
yeah,
saw, the weakness is in recovery at this point, so it has to be a trade-off. After you get to a certain point on the map, then you want to teach it to kind of revert back to the center.
yeah. And then the second step, which was interesting, is that in order to train for a situation where your opponent is off platform in the air, it's better to use a well rounded opponent in data collection because there's more chances that your opponent can be in those scenarios where you can then execute an in air combo.
Exactly. And also, I just like using that because the opponent also like knocks me really far. And so it helps training recovery from certain areas that you wouldn't otherwise be able to recover from. Um, but yeah, it seems
Yeah.
like it wasn't chasing me too much over there. I think it kind of knows not to get too close to the edge, but it certainly should sometimes kind of chase at least to here. And at those points, you kind of want to know what to do when you're on the outside, like I mentioned earlier, when you're on the outside and your opponent's on the inside, and you're in the air. So yeah, in those
Yeah.
cases, it's really hard to do with just the dummy.
Yeah. And then the last point there is obviously when you were training against a well-rounded opponent, you had data collection on almost the entire time.
Yes.
And the way that you can marginalize behaviors that you don't want your AI to learn is in configuration by playing around with epoch, lambda, focus areas. You can really isolate for the situations where it's kind of more focused on the situations where it's related to off air, like off platform combos.
Kind of. Like it's still going to have the entire data set. So if you showed it something on platform, you're still going to have that data in there. But what you can just tell it to do
Mhm.
is ignore the platforms, right? So you can just not focus on the raycast
Right.
to the platforms, and you can just say, I just want you to focus on the direction and the angle to the opponent, so that that's kind of the dominant driver of what's making your decision. You know what I mean?
Right on. Yep. That makes sense. Okay, I'm just searching through a couple of questions here. Guanta Bean asks, if my AI tracks its opponent well on the platform, but currently it doesn't track it well in the air, should I start over with the tracking or completely reset the AI and start from scratch? Right now, in the air, my AI just wants to return to platform. It doesn't really do anything in terms of attack.
Hmm. Okay, give me 1 second to think through this. So, um, I mean, it's not a bad thing, by the way. It's a more safe and kind of defensive AI. Um, so, if we put aside like what we think is like the optimal strategy and just focus on like the fact that you certainly want to track your opponent in midair, um, I would say that when you're in when you're in the air. This is tough. Okay, because let me give you an example. So let's say the opponent's here, you're here, you hit the opponent, then you want to recover back onto platform after your opponent's like back here, right? So obviously to recover back onto platform in that session, you're going to want to use the raycasting features so that the AI kind of knows where the platforms are, right? Um, of course, once you do that, then once you basically do that, then it's going to really try to get back on the platform if that's what you constantly show it, and that's not a bad thing. Essentially, what you need to do is you need to kind of have like a trade-off, right? And this only comes by training a lot, by the way. You have to do a lot of sessions because of the fact that we use interpolation. Um, Actually, this is great that last week's Get Good session is coming in handy here because of the fact that we are using kind of like interpolation. Um, we know that basically here versus here, um, it's going to have like similar results, or like even here versus here is going to have similar results. But you see though that it does switch kind of like a little bit. So you'll remember from my session that as you continue to train more and more and more, this probabilities get more and more and more kind of I wouldn't say discrete, but there's a very strong, for example, right might be like 90% here and might be like 0% here, right? Which is ultimately what you want to get to. Where I imagine what you want is you want to have basically like a line right here, and you say up until this point chase the opponent, but when you get back here, maybe then you want to get back onto platform, right? Um, and that really only comes by like doing a lot of training sessions, right? You just need to like almost like beat it into the AI, like show it so many times and keep training so that it's solidified that, okay, I'm going to keep attacking my opponent until here, and then I'm going to recover onto platform, right? Um, so that's kind of what you want to do. And I'll just reiterate the reason why it's getting back onto platform is because you are using the raycast features, but I would not get rid of those features, right? Because they are important to recover after you land a hit on your opponent. And so essentially what you want to do is you want to train your AI to say like follow the opponent until such a time that either the distance is too far, right? So that's distance to opponent, or you are traveling too far across the map, right? Maybe you don't want it to extend beyond here, in which case you're going to have to use the your position feature, right? So you're going to have to use all those features in conjunction with each other and really show it the same thing over and over again. And you're going to want to train on high epochs. Um, Another reason why you're going to want to use your position anyway when you're in this scenario is because you'll notice that not a lot of rays are actually no rays are intersecting with any of the platforms. So the AI literally does not know that there's platforms around it, right? And so when this is the case, you need to use your position so it knows relatively where it is on the map. So it'll know if it's getting dangerously close to the edge of the map, right? And if it does, you can train it to get back onto center, right? And as it moves to the left, it starts detecting the platforms and then it can say, okay, I'll return back, right? Same thing on this side, right? It doesn't know. Um, I know I rambled for a bit, but I really hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I think that your position feature um, probably answered a few questions that people may have had here. There was a question from Frozen Sense. He was describing my AI has a weight of 68, and it when it follows an opponent off stage to try to hit the opponent, it doesn't really know to recover back.
Yeah,
So it kind of just falls to its death a lot of time.
yeah.
So I think that is related to what you were just describing, like the awareness, like your position feature teaches you're able to isolate for skills where your AI is paying attention to where it is on the map.
Yes, yes, but I would also cautious you guys. If you have a heavy fighter, you might not want to train it to do that because of the fact that you have limited recovery options. So, for example, actually, let me just hop back into here just to show you guys. So, um, when you're in the air, right, and you do the uppercut, you can't do the uppercut again, right? So I'm continually pressing it right now, and it won't let me do it again. Same thing with the flip kick. You can only do it once in the air. I was continually pressing it. It only did it once, right? So what does that mean? It means, for example, if I do uppercut in that, now all I have left is the jump. As soon as I exhaust the jump, I kept pressing buttons. I couldn't recover at that point because I lost all my recovery options. So what does that mean? It means if you are chasing your opponent, right? And let's say you're chasing the opponent, do uppercut and then flip kick, and you're doing these sick combos in the air, and you run out of combos and you're here, you can't recover at that point. So yeah, chasing the opponent is great, but you have to ensure that you do it in a way where you maintain your ability to recover, right? So for example, like um, if I hold on, let me just like toss my opponent up. So if I did that, you'll notice that I ran out of combos. I kept kind of pressing after a while, and I was on stage, so it was fine to do like this type of stuff. But if you're off stage, you can imagine it gets really difficult, right? So now I have no more recovery options, and I died. Um, so just keep that in mind, guys, that a lot of these aerial combos are sick, but it's you have to be strategic in terms of like how you use it. Um, and going back to what I previously said, let me just kind of like you saw that I was able to do. Hold on, I was able to do that aerial punch multiple times over there while I'm in the air. Like I mentioned, those don't get exhausted in the air, so you can keep kind of doing those. I'll just show you here. So you can keep doing those, but the uppercut and the flip kick you can only do once because they are recovery options. Hope that answered your question. So going back, if you saw my earlier videos that I shared in exclusive access, most of my combos were stringing together multiple of these in the air. I basically hit the opponent back, move forward, hit them again with that. Um, yeah, so hope that answers your question.
There's one question from JPEG, which is more of a suggestion. He
Hmm.
asks, is it possible in the future to add a feature in the config to just focus on a pinpointed area on the map? For example, just focus training with these boxes that I have chosen.
Um, Not sure I understand. Let me just do a drawing just to make sure. So let's say, for example, this was the map over here. Uh, what JPEG is saying is like, I only want you to train in this area, or I only want you to train in this area over here. Is that what he's referring to?
Yes, that's what he's referring to.
My God. Um, Sorry, I'm just thinking this through. Um, it's not that straightforward. And I'll explain why it's not that straightforward. Actually, I'll draw it over here. So if you remember, I said I wasn't going to do machine learning, but we're doing machine learning now. um, so just I won't draw all the neurons, but um, so this is kind of like the way machine learning works, or specifically for neural networks. You have some input, then you have some like hidden layers over here, and then you have some output over here, right? These inputs over here are predefined. They are not dynamic. And they cannot be dynamic because each of these connections, right, these are weights, right? This is the intelligence, right? So what happens if you introduce a new input, right? So you introduce a new thing over here. You say, I want to train in this area over here. Now that's a new input, right? Call it W5. It has no intelligence, right? And that'll actually mess up the entire network, right? Because each neuron, so like each of these hidden layers is comprised of a neuron, and each neuron takes multiple inputs into it, right? And now if you introduce a new one, it'll change the value of the neuron. Similarly, if you have another neuron over here, right, introducing this new value changes this neuron. right? So now by introducing a new input, you're changing every single neuron in this hidden layer, which then changes every single neuron in this hidden layer, which then changes all the probabilities in the outputs, right? So you might say, okay, but we're just adding one. Well, what happens if instead of, hold on, let me use a different color. What happens if instead of this, sorry, I'm going to make it thicker. Instead of this box over here, you wanted to make it slightly bigger and do something like that. Well, that's another input. And what happens if instead of this, you wanted to make it something like that? That's another input, right? And that won't work, right? Because we can't have dynamic inputs because it basically changes all the hidden representations in the network, which then changes the probabilities in the outputs. Um, Now, one thing you might say is like, okay, why don't we just then do this? Why don't we divide the stage into a grid like this, right? And then you can allow people to select which area of the grid that they want to train on. Well, that also doesn't really work because what happens if you have different map sizes, right? Different map sizes should result in different like number of cells on the map, right? Otherwise, the level of granularity is different, right? And also this doesn't really make sense in the respect of like, okay, you're training one map on this cell over here, um, but this cell doesn't really make sense at all in the context of another map, right? Because there's nothing there, right? And so you're training it for this specific cell over here. But that specific cell is very specific to this map. And so what happens is you get something that overfits to a very specific environment, and it won't generalize well to any other environments, right? And this is a very important concept in machine learning, is that we want our AIs to be able to generalize, right? And whenever we do something like this, what happens is we basically lock it in to this specific map. It doesn't know how to do well on other maps because I'll give you an example. This map has the edge of the platform in it over here, right? What happens if and so what it's doing is edge guarding here, and you train it to edge guard here. What happens if in another map there is no platform there and instead the platform's here? Well, it'll be in the mid air over here and it'll try to edge guard and then it'll just die, right? It won't know what to do. Um, so just want to, and you might be saying, okay, what you can also do then is you can provide another input over here to tell it which map it's on. Well, that might, that kind of works, but not really. I don't want to get into exactly why, but like it comes into the question of how do you represent the map, and you can't necessarily represent it in just like in just like a number, right? Usually, what people do in machine learning is they represent it in something that's called a one-hot encoding, right? So it'll either be zeros or ones, right? Um, and zeros everywhere except for the one it is. So like, let's say this is like the treasure map, right? This is the treasure map so that it knows when it's on the treasure map, this will get a one. Let's say, for example, this is like the training map. Oops. So that it knows um, when it's in the training map, this will get a one and this will be a zero instead, so that it knows, okay, I'm in the training map, then I'm going to use this specific, I'm going to know that this cell corresponds to this, blah, blah, blah. That also runs into a problem because we intend to add more and more maps to the game. And so this is basically, this is basically completely dynamic. This is so annoying. Um, this is now completely dynamic, and we remember that when this is dynamic, we're introducing more and more neurons into here, and that messes up the entire hidden representation every time we do that. Um, anyway, I kind of went on a ramble here. I think it's a very great question that you brought up. It's just very, very difficult to apply in practice. There are so many like things that we need to consider that don't necessarily work for neural network training when we do something like this. And so that is why every one of the features we considered are features that that work in a general sense, regardless of map setup or anything like that. That's also why we don't have features that correspond to specific platforms, because all the platforms are always changing, right? The location of the platforms, the size of the platforms, the number of platforms is changing, and so that's kind of why everything we do is very, very general. Like the raycast, that's a very general feature, as opposed to saying, where am I in position to this specific platform, if you know what I mean. Okay, I'm gonna stop now because I kind of went off a little bit, and we're also running up on time. But I really hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. I think that was a great context, and we said that there would be no math, but there was a little bit of math ish.
Ish.
Anyway, but loved it. We're running up on the top of the hour. I think this was a really cool session. Obviously, we have this recorded, and it will be posted on YouTube, maybe in a few hours, so you guys can go back and check it out. There will be a quiz on this next week, so feel free to study what was discussed in this session. And also next week we may run a bigger quiz. I'm thinking it through. We have had now, this is the fifth episode. Want to encourage people to go back and review and rewatch some of the prior episodes, because there's always new content and things that you're teasing out of these videos that you may not have kind of realized the first time around. So we may do what's called a midterm. We'll do a mini exam. We'll do more questions, more AP on the line. So you guys can go back, review all of the different videos, come back, and we'll do a bigger test, basically more questions, more AP for next week. So as always, thank you, Guppy, for sharing the alpha with everyone. Thanks, everyone, for showing up. For the people who asked some good questions, I'll be doing some discretionary airdrops of AP here. Have a great day. Keep practicing if you're in the Treasure Cup. Tomorrow, the competition starts at noon Eastern. All right?